Hello, happy Wednesday. I feel like it's been a minute since I've been live with you all. Been doing some traveling. It's summertime, school's out, I think, in most of the country. And so I'd love to know if you were taking a summer vacation, if you're going somewhere fun. We've got our vaccinations. I got my hair chopped off for summertime. If you're going somewhere fun, drop a note in the comment section. I would love to hear from you, where everyone's going on their adventures, if you've been feeling kind of like stuck indoors. So if you're going on some trips, I'm heading to Texas this weekend. So we're doing some traveling ourselves. And then I'm going to Phoenix to see friends who had a new baby. So really excited to get back out and doing some traveling and seeing some people, which is super exciting. But even more exciting is today's guest. We have been talking to each other for a while. I think we met through Jess at Campbell, I believe. I'll have to ask Dominique when she comes on. But Dominique Calixte is a millennial and fundraising professional with an interest in helping to activate millennials as change makers through philanthropy and effective DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion practice in the fundraising space. In her career, she has supported nonprofits in building revenue streams, implementing systems, and inclusive fundraising practices. I am really excited to have Dominique come on today to really talk about how can your organization better understand the value of centering diversity, equity, and inclusivity into your communications efforts. It's a really big topic, and I think sometimes there's so much going on that we don't slow down to educate ourselves on really important topics. And so I'm excited to bring her on screen today. She's going to be sharing with you some different tactics. And I'm all about functional, useful tips that you can integrate into your organization right now. So really quickly, just to center the conversation before I bring her on, I wanted to share this quote with you. When we listen and celebrate what is both common and different, we become wiser, more inclusive, and better as an organization. And I think the key word here is first to listen. And then we celebrate, right, together. So making sure every single voice is heard. So without further ado, hey, Dominique.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Happy summertime, girl.
Happy summer. I mean, it's summer. It's summer. It's hot. I am constantly like, turn that AC on.
I know. She's up in Boston. You're on this side of my screen, actually. I'm in Atlanta. It's hot everywhere. Are you going on any friend trips this summer?
I am going to go to Richmond, Virginia in a few weeks, which I'm super excited about. And that's so far as I planned. I still oh my God, things are normal. I could go on trips.
I know. Oh, it's back. We were in the airport this past weekend and it was slammed.
I can only imagine, because just even in walking about, being in the city, I'm like, oh, we're all here.
We're here. Everyone's out. Well, thank you for your time today. I'm really excited to have you with me to share your knowledge on this topic. I heard one of your presentations in Jess's summit, which was now it seems like forever ago.
Yeah, it seems like so. I feel like it's coming up on a full year now.
I know, which is how long I've been trying to be like, I need to get you on here. So, and weren't you also on with John and Becky?
I was. Oh, I love them. They're so great.
Everyone, if you have not,
John and Becky, if you're listening,
you need to go listen to the We Are for Good podcast. They're incredible. Dominique's been on there. I've been on there. Clearly, they're bringing the best possible people to talk. So
only the best.
Without further ado, I'll kind of just hand it over to you. Dominique has an amazing presentation for us, and I'm going to pop in with questions, but I want to make sure that as we're going along, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments, and we will make sure to answer them for you. I want this to be as interactive as always as possible. And so with that, Dominique, I'll let you rock and roll.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Again, hey, it's me. It's Dominique. I'm the current Associate Director of Annual Giving and Special Events at YW Boston. If you don't know about YW Boston, we're a part of the National YW Coalition, where we are working to eliminate racism and empower women with a particular focus on women of color. And so you're probably like, that's every intersection in your being. And I'm like, yes, it is. And so I'm very passionate about talking about the intersections and my work at YW. And because of that, I really started to think about how to be more inclusive about fundraising practices and really kind of dismantle some of the ideas that were rooted in some of the early beginnings of fundraising that have got us into some of our inclusive practices. So again, like I said, we are creating inclusive and equitable spaces within the city of Boston, specifically for YW Boston. And we do that through a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion services. So if you want to learn more about YW Boston or any of the YWs, because we all carry out the mission in a very different way, feel free to reach out to your local YW or me, and I can direct you to the right place. So now let's actually talk about the inclusive fundraising, the bread and butter of it all. So inclusive fundraising ties very well to inclusive communications. And I'm sure all of you have talked and thought through communication strategies, and because they tie so importantly with your fundraising strategies. And so when you're thinking about your fundraising strategies, how they directly correlate with your communication strategies is because with your fundraising strategies and with your communication strategies, you're trying to attract people. And so you're attracting people through and for fundraising through your communications via online content, events, partnerships, all things that are going to allow you to really populate the narrative around your organization. And that's a part of your inclusive fundraising and your inclusive communication, because again, they go hand in hand. And then you have you're looking at how you're engaging. And so with fundraising, you're hoping to engage. And when you're engaging, that's going to require support from your communication efforts, because you're going to be sending out touch points via email, or maybe it's a mail out, because we're getting back to mailing things because things are getting normal. And so you're really thinking about how you're creating those touch points, and that's how you're collaborating with communications. And then you also want to be able to convert. And so where that kind of ties with your communications is you're showing the impact of your organization so that you're able to really steward the folks that are coming in through these different channels after you've attracted and engaged them. So you're really just trying to take them through these things, and inclusive fundraising and communications are going to attract a variety of people that are going to come to your organization, and that's important. And we'll talk about why that's important. But before we talk about why it's important, you're probably like, what's inclusive fundraising? I only know about regular fundraising. And I like to think of inclusive fundraising as the active work of grounding your fundraising practices in equity, anti-racism, and justice, so that the folks that are missing from your funding conversation are invited to the table. And by having those people who are missing from those funding conversations join the table, you're bringing in innovation and fresh ideas, and you're also allowing for your organization to really think about how they're bringing power to communities. Because the real thing that you're trying to do with fundraising is uplift and empower communities while they are doing what they do best. You want to add that added support so that they're able to bring power to their community. And so inclusive fundraising really allows for you to do that, because you're bringing all those different voices and perspective to your fundraising table. And so I want to talk about the things that you want to avoid doing when it comes to inclusive fundraising, because if you start doing some of these things, you're really going to create opportunities to alienate people so that they're not involved in that conversation. And that's not the goal here. You want to make sure that you're bringing in as many people as possible so that you can bring uplift power to that community. So things that you really want to focus on doing when you're thinking about inclusive communications and fundraising is avoiding phrases that center pity towards others. And so I think oftentimes as fundraisers, as nonprofit folks, we're really trying to drive home this point, and you want to bring about tears. You want to invoke an emotion. And you could definitely invoke an emotion because that is definitely, you want people to be genuinely connected, and to be genuinely connected, there has to be some emotional connection there. But you have to think about how you're trying to create that emotional connection, and centering it in pity is not going to allow for people to feel like anyone can come to your fundraising table, because if you're using phrases like underprivileged and inner city, these are terms that are very coded and can have a certain tinge to folks that identify in different ways. For instance, I'm a woman of color and I grew up in the city of Boston. I feel a certain way when people use the word inner city because of the connotation that comes with it. And then with that connotation, there's some coded understanding of what I'm capable of doing because I'm from the inner city. So you really want to be aware of that and making sure that you're avoiding phrases that center pity towards others. You also want to avoid opportunities for communities to be a stop on your poverty tour. And so you really want to think through how you're engaging people and bringing them into the community, because if you're bringing them into the community and you're using phrases that center pity towards the people who are in these communities, and they're really focusing on the negative and the things that aren't there, then you're creating a situation where the impoverished are just a stop on a tour, and you're passing through and you're not partnering. And really with fundraising, the way that you should be doing it, and you should be thinking about fundraising, you really want to think about it as you're creating partnerships with communities so that you can empower. Like I said, you want to bring power to communities. And so if you're making it so that you're a stop on the poverty tour, you're not going to be bringing power to those communities. And then when in turn it's time when you're seeing those people come out and try and engage, they're not going to feel like they are equals and able to, be a part of the supports that are coming from your organization.
And I wanted to ask a quick question on this. So when we are actively going through writing exercises, whether it's an email or a social post or whatever, right? Is there something that you recommend? I was just writing notes. Like when you're in the process of writing, is there a way to catch yourself, or something that you have or recommendations to look at where you could say, oh, this might be something. And what comes to mind to me is obviously if you have a more diverse leadership team or team in general that can review it, then they're able to help you out with that. But if they don't, is there something that they can do, or that, I don't know, I'm speaking gibberish right now, but basically that they can pause, because I think we do things so fast these days and don't take time to be and that's why we have all these big PR things that happen with big brands, which is miraculous to me because they go through layers of approvals. But is there something you recommend when you're going through the process of writing or developing creative that can kind of have you an inclusive checklist almost?
Yeah, no. And so there are a couple of things. So I think that one thing that I talk about for sure is making sure that you build in time for audits of your material. So you should constantly be putting fresh eyes to things, because not only, so today this word can have a positive connotation, and then 2 weeks later something can happen and it can change. So you want to make sure that you're using fresh eyes and taking into context what is going on when you're putting out these pieces of collateral and you're talking to your donors, because again, things change. Nothing is static. we're constantly going through the motions. So making
100%.
sure, so making sure you're going through and doing some quarterly audits of your materials, seeing if anything needs to change, making sure that things are still relevant. But on top of that, as you're doing those quarterly audits, kind of going through and making a list of those words that you know have come up time and time again, and saying those are like on your don't list. So creating your own personal like, do not use list is important, because you as your organization, you need to know what is going on with your community and what's going to have a certain impact, and you need to know those words so that you're not putting your community in harm's way through your acts of communication or fundraising practices. And that's really important.
I love that. I think it would also be interesting, like my brain's spinning right now too, is to have different stakeholders review, maybe it's a website. And so maybe have the people you're serving review your website and let you know what they think. A board of director, a donor, a volunteer, and then you get a full scope about what all different types of people and their different role in your organization, and if anything that you might be saying is triggering for them or is offensive or doesn't make sense or isn't clear, all the above.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think that with that, you also need to make sure that you're compensating people for their time, whether it's, sending them a thank you card or doing something, because they have no real tie to giving you their thoughts and opinions. And it's a part of, you're asking them to do some taxing work and going through and looking through your materials, and maybe you slip up and you use something that is triggering or whatnot. That's still something that can be taxing to them. So you want to make sure that you're acknowledging that you're using their time and you're putting them in a situation that might not be the most comfortable. So you don't want to just be like, hey, I'm out here and I need to do this and you're going to do this for me. You really need to make sure. And I'm sure I'm beating a drum over and over here, because we're all fundraisers and we know that we should be thanking our supporters and thanking the people who are partnering with us, but just want to make sure we drive that point home, because oftentimes we're sharing stories and we're not thinking about the taxing part about sharing that story and getting the consent to share those stories.
Awesome.
And so another thing that you want to make sure that you're avoiding when you're talking and thinking through your inclusive fundraising practices is using stereotypes, because when you're using stereotypes, you're really going to reinforce some of those coded some of that coded language and some of those perpetuated beliefs about the community, while trying to uplift and empower. So you're really contradicting yourself here. So you're trying to evade those stereotypes through your work and your mission and working towards your mission, but you're highlighting those stereotypes, and that can also cause harm to those who may identify with the community that you're partnering with, or might be coming from the community that you're partnering with, and they might not feel like they can come to that community, come and be a part of the funding conversation, because you're bringing up these stereotypes that aren't necessarily true and could put them in a position where they're lesser than their other peers at that funding table. The other thing that you want to avoid doing is being transactional. There's nothing about this community that is up for grabs and for sale. You don't want to make it so that the community is a commodity. You want to make sure that you're focused on making sure that the community is being uplifted. And I mean, we know this, when you're doing a transaction and things are sold, things tend to lose value. And so you don't want to make it so that you're putting your community in a situation where it's able to lose its value because it's such a transactional experience. So you want to really focus the funding conversation and the support for the community on the fact that there is a connection to this community, and you want to support empowering the community, rather than you want to push buy something or, you know, have this transaction happen so that thus this other thing happens. Another thing you want to avoid is being very heavily centered on you. And when I say you, I'm saying, like, we all love to use the phrase, like, you are the reason, but you really want to consider how you're using those phrases, because you are creating this, and I'm doing it right now, and how I'm using the term you, but you're really creating the focus on the person rather than the focus being on empowering the community. And really what the focus is always supposed to be is on the community being empowered. And so using very heavily centered you language is removing the conversation from the community and really focusing on the intrinsic needs of that particular individual. And that's not the focus here. You really want to focus on the community, because when you focus on the community, you're going to build a relationship between that individual and the community that you can continue to foster as you continue to cultivate that relationship with the individual in your organization. So I want to talk about things that you should be doing as you're thinking about inclusive fundraising. So we already started to talk a little bit about this, because we talked about, you know, having a list. But first thing that you want to do is be intentional. So you want to make sure you're really thinking through how you are going through and mapping out your fundraising efforts and mapping out your communications efforts. You want to make sure that you're thinking about who's reviewing it, who's involved in the creation of this. And even a step before that, you mentioned who's on your fundraising team and who's really coming up with the concepts and the ideas that are driving your fundraising efforts. So this is a plug for making sure, you know, you support diversity and inclusion in your hiring practices.
Yes. And I love this too from the standpoint of board of directors, and making sure that, so there's an organization I work with that works with high school and college students. And there's always this conversation of, well, we wish we knew what they wanted or what they were doing. And I was like, you should bring them and let them have a seat on the board. Mm-hmm. So I think also really important diversity in so many ways, including age. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. A lot of times when I've been in a boardroom, I look around and I am by far the youngest.
Absolutely.
And so I'm sure you see the same thing too. And it's like, I walk in and I'm like, okay, there's no one else here that is living life as I'm living life right now. So I love that point too. So making sure that they're in your boardroom, making sure that you're hiring them in your processes. It's great.
And so the next thing you want to be sure you're doing is being relevant. And we talked about that too, making sure that you're thinking through and reviewing things, but you also want to be clear and deliberate. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time to really be concise about it, because you don't want to have the opportunity to add in anything that is up for confusion or would offer any points for people to feel like that you're using language that's alienating to folks that identify a certain type of way. You also want to be very specific and make sure that you are thinking through how you're talking about data points and things like of that nature, so that you can really drive home your point, because that is what's going to bring in as many diverse opinions and voices to your table, because they're getting a clear picture of what your organization is trying to do. And the most important, in my own opinion, is making sure that you're focusing on the strengths and the assets of the community. So you don't want to always say, like, this community has nothing, and we're making sure that we are bringing this and that to the community. I love to say, well, here are the odds that are present in the community. And yet this community is still rich with culture, still able to do this, and this, and they're still thriving in this way. We want to create opportunities for them to continue to thrive.
That's awesome. I love that one too. Do you have examples? And I know I'm asking you this just off the cuff here. of organizations that you've seen do it right?
Yeah. So I'm going to shout out a particular school here in Boston that I actually had a conversation with recently, who does a really good job at making sure that they bring in the voices of the student parents and the students themselves when it comes to something that seems as simple, very simple, and wash, rinse, and repeat, their gala. So, and I am infamous for saying I hate events. I think that fundraising needs to kind of shift the way we do events a little bit more, because
Yes.
it's not the best.
Well,
And
so literally, you mentioning that galas feel very non-inclusive, because you say you want to invite all these people, but your starting ticket price is $500, $1,000 sometimes to get a seat at the table.
Yeah.
That's impossible to so many people.
Yeah. And so really thinking through that and bringing in people like the students and like their parents and like people from the community that are surrounding the school to have that conversation. Like, I support the school. I see the children every day, but I'm not going to a $500 gala. And
Right.
even something as simple as, like, I, as a student, love to support and go to the gala and support my school. But it's weird that we go to school down here in the city and y'all are trekking us out to this swanky hotel down there. Like, thinking through the logistics of things like that and really having those conversations around the operational needs, so that you're not forgetting to kind of check the privilege that comes with some of the fundraising practices that we have had for a really long time. And I mean, they're really based in very antiquated practices.
Yeah, no, it's really true. I love organizations that are focusing on the smaller, even recurring donors, and making sure that there's gratefulness and thankfulness in the smaller gifts, because that person is making a difference with their $20 gift, right? And that can considerably grow. That's what happened in 2020. It was more individual gifts at lower amounts, but still created an overall uptick in donations raised, which was really interesting to see how that happened. And that's I think, going to be the shift as we are millennials. And so seeing how we give differently than the boomer generation and others, and especially with Gen Z coming out, which I know you talk a lot about millennial giving.
Yes.
But is there like one thing? So if someone was to be like, okay, I need to do an analysis, or I want to check myself, is there one thing you'd really recommend that someone do right now within their nonprofit organization surrounding inclusive fundraising, just to start?
I would say do an audit of your donor base and really try and see where your pools are, and then really look at, see who can be your connections so that you can bring in more diverse voices. Because oftentimes you have a lot of people within your donor base that you're not paying attention to because they're not your typical like major donor or your typical donor in your donor pool. And so you're like, oh, they give every year and it's no big deal. Or they're one of our monthly givers. You know, they're just always going to be around. But really paying attention to those people who have showed some sort of commitment and thinking through how can they bring in diverse voices, and how can you ask them to partner with you in bringing diverse voices, because they obviously see the value in your organization and they're offering a perspective that's different from your major donors that are your more typical ones. So how can you really cultivate that? And it's in doing that, you're having an opportunity to create a different kind of touch point that they're probably not used to and are going to appreciate more. So it's kind of twofold. So you're going to be able to, really think through how to, cultivate their network and bring in diverse voices to your funding table. But you're also really building a relationship with that particular person, because you're engaging them in a way that they haven't engaged with you before.
Love that. That's so good. I wrote down the timestamp for that. I was like, I'm coming back to that point. That's
that one right there. That's the one.
That's the one. That's so good. I just realized we are at time. I feel like I could talk to you about this forever.
Is there that keeps on giving?
There's so much. I know. Is there one like final thing you want to make sure that we get across and that we start to like work on and get right?
I know we talked about diversity, equity, inclusion in your fundraising practices more generally, but I really wanted to say, don't forget your millennials. I can't talk and not bring up millennials, because I think oftentimes people think gender, they think race, and absolutely, yes. But as a Black woman millennial, I want you to start thinking about me too.
Yes.
As a millennial.
Yes. So good. So good. I say this all the time that we are living in the world of Amazon, and how we purchase things with like 1-2 click done is what we are used to. And holy Toledo, Generation Z, and even they don't even know what the world was like without an iPhone. We remember that, but they don't. So they're going to want it even easier to go to, and they're going to expect a beautiful website and expect an easy way to give, and like expect personalization, because that's what brands are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I know we're like off track with the millennial, but any like tidbit, any tip?
Invest in monthly giving, y'all. Invest in monthly giving. Like, I feel like everyone's like, oh, it's a throwaway. It does its own thing, but you actually need to invest some time in like building out the structure, what it looks like, how you're cultivating your monthly givers. It's not just a throwaway.
I'm writing it down.
That's also the point.
That's also a timestamp. Dominique, you are amazing and lovely, and I love your energy. Thank you so much for A, being here, and B, doing what you do in the space.
Thank you for having me.
I hope to see you in person at some point in our nonprofit industry. I'm sure we'll end up running into each other at some point. I'm just waiting for the day, because all the conferences are going to move to in person, and we're all going to be in the same place, just nerding out on fundraising, and I can't wait. That's it. Awesome. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your Wednesday. You too. Bye. Girl. All right, everybody. Just one last thing. Make sure to drop any questions you have in the comments. We'll try and come back to those. Dominique's amazing. She has so many awesome resources to share with you and experience. Coming up in July, on July 12th, I ended up pushing it back a week because of July 4th. I have a free webinar called the Donor Attraction Method, where I will be walking you through my 4-step ad series to attract new donors. Again, it's free, July 12th at 1 p.m. If you're interested, I will drop the link in the comments. And with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of their day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.